Ben Spagan. I'm the Vice President at the JES. Now, this event is part of the JES's Raimy Fellowship Program, an additional optional track of the JES's Civic Leadership Academy, designed to offer an enhanced opportunity for participants to deepen their knowledge and understanding of leadership while completing individualized guided research on critical issues facing the region, the state, and sometimes the nation. Before I introduce the director of the Raimy Fellowship Program, Dr. Andrew Roth, who will introduce our presenting fellow, I want to run through some housekeeping. Now, we are hosting this event both via Zoom webinar and live streaming on the JES's Facebook page. If you're attending via Zoom, please feel free to interact with us using the Q&A function, as following the presentation, we will be taking questions from you, the viewers. If you're tuning in via Facebook, leave your questions and comments in the comments section of this post. We're going to work our way through as many questions as we can following the presentation. And of course, if you're listening to or watching a later broadcast of this program, still send us your questions, your comments on the JES's Facebook page or this event or on our YouTube channel, as we want to keep this conversation going. And of course, for more information about upcoming JES programs and publications, visit our website, jeserie.org. Be sure to like us on Facebook, connect with us on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, to introduce our Raimy Fellow, I'd like to introduce my JES colleague, Dr. Andrew Roth. Now, some of you might know Dr. Roth as a JES scholar in residence from the numerous lectures that he's delivered at the JES, many rooted in his American Tapestry project, which is also a podcast on WQLN Public Media, NPR, available everywhere over the many years that he's been with us. Or you might know Dr. Roth from his more than 200 and counting installments of book notes, which he churns out on a near weekly basis. Or you might know him as a member of the JES's Board of Trustees, or from his decades in higher education, from lecturing to leading, where he served as president of not one but two universities. He is, of course, all of those things and more. But here I am here to introduce him as the director of the Raimy Fellowship Program. Dr. Roth, thank you so much for all you do, especially guiding these young scholars, working with them on their leadership principles, getting to know leadership theory more, but also focusing on critical research that offers clear-eyed recommendations, rooted in good, practical, sound research that you guide them through. So excited to learn here. Thank you again, Dr. Roth, for teaching, mentoring, guiding these fellows through the learning opportunity and the research project. So here's where I turn things over to Dr. Andrew Roth, who will introduce today's Raimy Fellow.
Thank you, Ben. Today, we have believe it's the fourth Raimy Fellow presentation of the spring of 2025. The Raimy Fellows, as Ben said, is a subset of the Jefferson Civic Leadership Academy. Jefferson Civic Leadership Academy is actually, quite frankly, from my vantage point, the most important thing the Jefferson Educational Society does. We're extremely well known for the Global Summit, and Ben is busy putting together another outstanding lineup for this fall, and the numerous other programs that we do throughout the year. But the Civic Leadership Academy is really, I think, the way in which the Jefferson Society touches the future. It trains young leaders, aspiring leaders, and it trains them by facilitating their knowledge of leadership, but also helps them by exposing them to existing leaders and current projects in the greater Northwest Pennsylvania community. As I said, the Raimy Fellows is a subset of that, and the Raimy Fellows are a select group who want to do a little bit more, who step forward and volunteer. And we do two things. We have a seminar session. I think we have 4 or 5 of those in the fall, in which we do a kind of view from 50,000 feet, admittedly, a sprint across a variety of leadership theories. And that's an important thing. But the most important thing they do is they also undertake a piece of research that's of interest to them or related to their work or related to this year's major cohort topic. So far this year, we've had outstanding presentations by Sarah McCall, who did a project called the Loneliness Project, and using public libraries as third spaces where people could come together and get to know one another and to try to break down some of the social isolation that is plaguing American society. Kat DiVittorio did an outstanding presentation at the Corey Higher Education Council, which she'll later be doing here on live stream, in which she, based on a deep personal knowledge and personal commitment to the project, explored the possibility of opening and developing an autism center in Corey, a rural hub that would provide services to families with children on the autism spectrum. And that is an incredibly valuable thing. Allie Eagle did a new venture for the Raimy Fellows. She did an all-day workshop on women's leadership, which I think went over so well. We're going to be doing that annually. And today we have Brad Thompson, who's going to be doing a presentation on multi-generational leadership. Coming up later this month, Katie Phillips and Jacob Jones will be talking about the youth mental health crisis in Erie County. Sometime in June, I don't know the exact date, Matt Platts from the Corey Higher Ed Council will be talking about childcare is economic development. And then in July, Olivia Highbaugh will end this year's cycle by doing a workshop on Erie as a welcoming city and the importance of refugees and the importance of immigrants and the economic future and the socioeconomic future of the greater Erie area. But today, we're with Brad Thompson, who's going to be talking about multi-generational leadership. And this is a really important topic, and many of you who might in fact be supervisors or managers or leaders of work groups or organizations, our work groups these days aren't homogeneous. It isn't everyone is between the age of 25 and 55. They span multiple generations, older people for various reasons. Some of it is just high energy levels. Other is economic necessity. Older people aren't retiring. The younger people are coming into the workforce at different times for different reasons. And these generations, as we are learning in the political realm, these generations have different ways of looking at the world, and understanding how to blend them into a functioning team is now becoming a critical skill set required by leaders. Brad, as I said, is a member of this year's Jefferson Civic Leadership Academy. Brad actually works in public broadcasting at WQLN. He is on the radio side of the house, so I actually know Brad a little bit because that's where the American Tapestry Project is housed. And so, Brad, I'm going to turn the screen over to you today as you tell us about multi-generational leadership. And just one last piece of housekeeping for the audience. Ben brushed up against it. Brad will do his presentation. If you have questions, post them to the Facebook page, if that's the vehicle you're using, or the webinar page. Ben is monitoring that. And at the end of the program, and Brad's presentation is about 30 to 40 minutes, we will then try to deal with audience questions and answers and have a Q&A afterwards. But first, here's Brad Thompson from this year's Raimy Fellows group on multi-generational leadership. Brad?
Thanks, Andy. It's a pleasure to speak with everybody today. This is a topic I'm really passionate about. I've been studying it for a very long time. And with the guidance of the JCLA and the Jefferson Society as a whole, it's just been a great experience. So I'd first like to start off by saying that there are two types of multi-generational groups. And the first one is your multi-generational work group, made up of, workers and, different jobs that you might be doing. There's multi-generational social groups. So multi-generational social group would be defined as a collection of individuals from different generations who share certain characteristics, interact with one another, and have a common identity. They may be bound together by shared interests, goals, or other features. While a work group is a little more straightforward, it's a group of individuals from different generations within a workforce that normally works together. So what is multi-generational management and leadership? Multi-generational leadership, management is the management and leadership of workforce personnel comprised of people from more than one generation. Management is defined as managers they promote stability while leaders press for change. Managers also organize to create human systems that can implement plans as precisely and efficiently as possible. There's a great quote: "Management is getting the confused, misguided, unmotivated, and misdirected to accomplish a common purpose on a regular, reoccurring basis." By that's a quote by Joe Fuller. Leadership, when it comes to leaders Set direction, develop, and that means developing vision with strategies for producing change. They align people, they communicate direction to those who can create coalitions committed to achievement of the vision, and they motivate and inspire. They keep people moving in the right direction by appealing to human needs, values, and emotions. There's a great quote from Nancy Cohen. Leadership is the creation of positive, non-incremental change, including the creation of a vision to guide that change, a strategy, the empowerment of people to make the vision happen despite obstacles, and the creation of a coalition of energy and momentum that can move that change forward. And I thought those were just perfect ways of summing up the sentiment. So just some examples of multi-generational work groups. You see food service, government, media employees, retail. There's many more out there, but these were just, 4 quick examples. We also have multi-generational social groups, includes families, social clubs like the Jefferson's Civic Leadership Academy. You can see a picture of us on our trip to Harrisburg. Sports teams and volunteers are all good examples of social groups. So here's some background on the subject. We're going to look at the emergence of the issue. So people are living longer, which results in more generations working in the same time period as one another. Medical science has improved the human lifespan. People are taking better care of themselves, and the population has increased over time, which means more people are looking for work in the workforce at the same time. And that's important to take note of, is that as populations grow, the workforce will grow, and we have to keep that in mind. So people are beginning to work at younger ages. People are beginning to work at younger ages. Some teenagers start to work as soon as they reach the age that allows them to work in their state. And there's 4 separate reasons that are really the primary cause of this. One is education. Some of them are saving to help pay for higher education, such as universities, colleges, and trade schools. Some of it's necessity. So the second one would be because some of them are starting to work earlier to help support their families, because their parents may not bring in as much income as is needed to provide for all their needs, such as clothing, books, transportation, healthcare, etc. The third would be experience. Some of them are working to gain valuable experience before they enter the full-time adult workforce. This allows them to be better prepared for the expectations and realities of full-time employment. And the fourth is one that you might not think about, but socializing. Some of them are working to have a wider social network. So the third part about working later in life is, people are working past the traditional retirement age. And there's also about 4 reasons I've narrowed it down to for this. Insurance needs. Companies can help pay for employee insurance. This results in some people deciding to work later in life to pay for their health care while still collecting a paycheck. So personal needs would be the second one on the list. Many jobs have not kept pay rates commensurate with inflation. This results in more people having difficulty saving for retirement. Third would be education. Some people were not taught and have not learned how to strategize for saving ahead for retirement to ensure they don't have to rely purely on Social Security. And D, it's actually same as younger people, is socializing. Some people stay in the workforce longer because it allows them to spend time with more people, get out of the house more often, and actually, they've developed relationships over years, and maybe they don't want to leave that social group that they've been with for a long time. So it's something important to think about when, how this issue has emerged in our society. Now, it's an old American issue, and it's one that's been going on since the very beginning of our country. And the United States has always had a diverse generational workforce. Most of the methods to become financially independent have required people of more than one generation to work together under a strict hierarchy. That has changed, obviously, but we're going to go into a little bit about the old side. So first off, we'll go with agriculture. The United States was primarily agricultural between 1776 and 1860. Young people that were going to take over the farm would start at a young age by helping their parents with relatively simple duties around the farm. As they grew older, they would take on difficult and more arduous tasks. They would also have to work from dawn till dusk, sometimes before dawn, depending on the duties and what kind of farm it was. Apprenticeships are still common today, but they have been since the very beginning of our country's establishment. Young people would apprentice in a trade or go to school at a young age, usually in their mid-teens, in order to secure a financial future. If a person wanted to learn a trade, they would join a guild of some kind, such as candle makers or printers. The person would have to put in a set number of years to work up the ranks to eventually become a master of their craft. On the way through the various stages, they would earn more money as their skills and experience grew. In the end, they would either take over the business or start their own business in another area that does not compete directly with the business they were trained in. And then third would be education. Young people who had the means would go to college or university to gain an education in some discipline, such as law or medical science. They would normally leave home by the age of 14 and live on the school grounds until they finished their studies. After school was completed, they would go to work for a professional in their field of study to gain experience. Eventually, the younger person would gain enough to start their own practice or take over their predecessor's practice. And this is pretty consistent throughout American history. So with the growing trend of generational diversity comes the challenge of figuring out how to create a workplace where engagement, loyalty, and productivity are high despite the differences among these demographic groups. So we're going to take a look at the generational mix. And here on this slide, I have 3 generations set out, and we're going to go ahead and define those generations and give you an idea of what that entails. So first, the earliest generation that you'll see in the workforce today is going to be the silent generation. They were born between 1925 to 1945. They're also known as the traditionalists. The stereotype is loyal but traditional, and there's also a stereotype of dependable, straightforward, tactful, civic-minded, hardworking, and patriotic. The silent generation famously got their name for being so conformist that they were silent through the McCarthy era when the fear of communism swept the country. During this era, kids were expected to earn their way through life using a strong work ethic. Most of them were born too late to see any action of World War II and were also too old for the hippie movement. Some things to keep in mind is that they were shaped by the Great Depression, World War II, radio and movies coming onto the scene. They're motivated by, in general, by respect, recognition, providing long-term value to a company. The communication style in general is the personal touch and handwritten notes, and they have a worldview that tends towards obedience over individualism, age equals seniority, and advancing through the hierarchy traditionally. The next group we have is the baby boom generation, obviously one of our largest generations. They are defined as 1946 to 1964. The stereotype for them is collaborative but averse to change, and they're optimistic, competitive, tend to be workaholics, and team-oriented. They are named for the population boom that occurred after World War II, and many young people of this generation defied their parents, protested the Vietnam War, and created the Summer of Love. They're the first generation to look at their kids' perspective of growing up, and they started the concept of having family meetings. They're continual learners, many of whom want to keep working for the intellectual stimulation. They tend to be more tech savvy into social media than they're given credit for, so that's something to consider. They're also still eager to change the world and optimistic, which is ironic because they're defined as the gloomiest generation, given that they have rated their satisfaction of life lower and their levels of anxiety higher than any other adult generation. Their lives have been shaped by the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, Watergate, the advent of atomic and nuclear weapons and energy, the United Nations, the Geneva Convention, and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, aka NATO. They tend to be motivated by company loyalty, teamwork, and duty. Their communication style for most of them is preferred to whatever is most efficient. That includes phone calls and face-to-face in-person contact. Their worldview tends towards achievement comes from paying one's dues and sacrificing for success. Some things that they fear in general tend to be being displaced by younger managers and new ways of doing things, technology and others. A reduction in productivity if they permit more flexibility and new, as yet unproven to them methods. Loss of professional identity, losing relevance, and losing clients. Just some extra facts. On average, 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age every day, and 49% of baby boomers expect or are already working past the age of 70. So continuing down that line, we have Generation X, 1965 to 1980. So Generation X, their stereotype would be independent but bleak. They're also considered flexible, informal, skeptical, and independent. They're often dismissed as the slacker generation. The slacker reputation evolved to hardworking though. So keep in mind that, these stereotypes change over time. The first to use the helicopter parenting style. Unlike their boomer parents who famously let their kids stay outside until the streetlights came on, Gen Xers tend to be far more involved with their children's social and educational development. They also tend to be self-reliant and want their own piece of the action, but they consider time as a currency like money. And family and friends come before a work-centric focus. Their lives have been shaped by the AIDS pandemic, the sexual revolution, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the dot-com boom, space exploration, the Cold War, the hippie movement, MTV culture, and the beginning of LGBTQ plus rights. They also tend to be motivated by diversity, work-life balance, their personal professional interests rather than the company's interests. Preferred communication style is whatever is most efficient, the same as their previous generation, including phone calls and face-to-face. And their worldview tends to favor diversity. They're quick to move on if their employer fails to meet their needs. They're resistant to change at work if it affects their personal lives, and they don't generally trust large institutions. Some of the fears they have tend towards losing clients, reduced profitability, losing millennial employees, aka turnover, in support roles, not being adequately prepared for major leadership roles, lack of support from boomers and millennials, so from both sides, the younger and the older, and then not having time for family, personal life. A good extra fact to note is that 55% of Gen Xers are startup founders. That's the highest percentage of any generation. And Gen X will outnumber baby boomers in the workforce by 2028. So next, we're going to go on to the millennials. They're also known as Generation Y. They're defined by the period of 1981 to 2000. The stereotype is driven but entitled, and also competitive, civic-minded, open-minded, and achievement-oriented. They're the first generation to have the internet available, which plays a significant role in their personal lives. They are willing to trade privacy for information and convenience. This generation has proven to be incredibly community-oriented and environmentally conscious, which are traits being picked up by their children. They do tend to towards have more short attention span, and they're uncomfortable with ambiguity. They must see career opportunities or they become impatient and they move on to new opportunities. They're more likely than their prior generations to encourage their children to live as their authentic selves, and they're leading the movement and helping gender non-conforming kids be happy with who they are. Millennials have a reputation for being self-centered, but are more progressive than previous generations. They're also more accepting of the LGBTQ rights movement, interracial marriage, and immigrants. You have to keep in mind that their generation is shaped by things like the Columbine shooting, 9/11, the internet, the Great Recession. They're also motivated, though, by responsibility, the quality of their manager, and unique work experiences. The communication style that tends towards things like instant messages, text, and email. The worldview, they tend to seek challenges, growth, and development. They want a fun work life. They want work-life balance. They're likely to leave a workplace if they don't like change, expect a lot of guidance and free information, and they demand transparency. Some of the things they fear, though, are not understanding perspectives and expectations of older colleagues, not doing everything right, disapproval, not appearing smart, quote unquote, and not having a voice or restriction of their self-expression. Just another extra fact would be 75% of the global workforce will be made up of millennials by 2025. So that's interesting to note, that the change in demographics. Next, we have Generation Z from 2001 to 2010. They're also called the iGen generation. So the stereotype for them is progressive but disloyal. They also tend to be global, entrepreneurial, progressive, and less focused. They're the first generation to be born into a world where they know nothing besides constant connection to one another through phones, screens, and tablets. They're often environmentally conscious, inclusive, and accepting of others, and extremely politically aware. They've grown up in a world of internet, war, disease, and financial insecurity, and have reported higher rates of anxiety and depression than some of the other generations. They tend to be hardworking problem solvers, very devoted to and personally involved in social causes, and they want prompt and frequent feedback, which is important to think about. Their lives have been shaped by the life after 9/11, the aftermath of the Great Recession, access to technology at a young age, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the housing bubble. They're motivated by diversity, personalization, individuality, and creativity. Their communication style tends towards social media, texts, and instant messages. The general worldview would be self-identity, and they self-identify as digital device addicts. They value independence and individuality. They prefer to work with millennial managers. They're innovative coworkers and new technologies, concerned with privacy and cybersecurity, and they're value conscious. Some fears that they generally have are loss of privacy, cyber warfare, environmental harm or climate change, global economic instability, and global terror/safety concerns. Just some extra facts to think about when it comes to Generation Z would be that 67% have stated they want to work at companies where they can learn skills to advance their careers. And 80% believe the government and employers should subsidize, pay tuition, or provide direct training for students. Excuse me. So let's go on to Generation Alpha, the newest generation to be entering the workforce. Generation Alpha is defined as 2010 to 2024. The stereotype right now with them is short attention spans, lazy, and adaptable. They also are technological, diverse, conscious, and educated. They're the first generation that will never know a time when social media didn't exist, and they're far more tech savvy than any previous generation, which is a powerful tool that can change humanity in a myriad positive ways. Although this reliance on technology could lead to reduced attention spans and fewer in-person connections. Some Gen Alphas were the first to be born during COVID. They're more diverse than any other generation, and they're more likely to be in a single parent household. They have the potential to redefine education and the workforce. They have been shaped by the iPad, the Occupy Wall Street movement, and the killing of Osama bin Laden. Motivated by skill-based learning, employee recognition and validation, and tech-enabled workspaces. Their communication leans towards social media, text, and instant messages as well. Their worldview, self-management, and self-organization. They want to be full partners in making the changes that affect them, and the desire for purpose-led work. Some general fears of this generation tend to be economic and political uncertainty, housing shortages, lack of social security, technology addiction, and climate change. Some extra facts are 2.8 million Gen Alphas are born globally each week. 65% of the Gen Alphas will work in jobs that don't exist today. So those are just some things to keep in mind when you're thinking about Generation Alpha. And this is the generation that's just starting, Generation Beta. Now, they're not in the workforce yet, obviously, but eventually they will be. So it's too soon to know much about them. But we can say that they are going to be the first generation born with AI involved in most things that they do. Technology is probably going to be involved in almost every aspect of their lives, and they most likely will have less privacy than the previous generations combined. So let's take a look at challenges and benefits of multi-generational leadership. Here you can see the graphics on the screen. We have communication. Older generations are more likely to stay quiet about something they don't agree with, at least with their leaders. They may still talk to their coworkers and peers. Younger generations are more likely to speak to their leaders when they disagree with something or think a decision is against their personal or professional beliefs. So a good example would be older generations may not question the leadership, while younger generations may question leadership often. Discrimination. Older generations have a higher chance of having been taught discriminatory behavior that the younger generation has been taught to avoid or not engage in. A good example of that that's easy to point out would be that older generations may stereotype gender roles, while younger generations may believe that gender roles don't matter. Then we look at life experiences in the center of the screen. Life experiences, depending on when a person was born, those people may have seen shortages or surpluses that shape the way they view the world. Gas shortages in the 1970s versus surpluses in the 1960s may be a good example of that. If anybody here was around for the 70s or have read about it, there were lines around the corners for gas stations. It's just something to think about when you're talking to these people about what their experience has been throughout life. Relationship expectations. Older generations will view the professional relationships differently than their younger counterparts. Younger generations are more likely to look for more interpersonal relationships with their coworkers and leaders, while older generations are more likely to keep a strict line between their work life and personal life. Older generations may not want to talk about what goes on outside of the workplace, whereas younger generations may share everything, and you may have to find a way to guide the younger generation as to what limitations there are on that when it's appropriate. And technology. Newer technologies might be difficult for older generations to get the hang of, while old technologies may be difficult for younger generations to get the hang of. That's not necessarily true for everybody, though. People from all generations, it's a mixed bag, but it's good to keep it in mind. A good example of that is using a power drill, a cordless power drill versus like a hand drill that you actually have to crank with your hand. Or maybe a vacuum versus a broom and dustpan if you're working in like a environment like retail or construction or something like that. As you can see on the screen, there is a good quote here about ineffective leadership. I just thought it was really perfect to sum up what we're talking about here. When you micromanage, you're telling your team that you don't believe in them. The strongest teams are built on trust, not a constant need for control. Let's take a look at the benefits of multi-generational leadership. So first, we'll start off with communication. The various generations have different communication styles and needs. This can be used to better understand one another while helping the employees better communicate with customers. We also have inclusion. Workplaces that are welcome to a wide variety of people that tend to value the things that make each person unique and not discriminate because of it. Diversity, it kind of goes hand in hand with inclusion. Diverse perspectives allow for better understanding and problem solving. Capabilities. Different generations will have a variety of ways that they approach a task. Be open to that when you're discussing things with your employees and your coworkers. You never know what their experience brings to the table when it comes to that. It kind of ties into the diverse perspectives in terms of their capabilities, in the sense that they may have thought of a way to do something more effectively than you did, and it may be something that you can adopt down the road. Or you may be able to help them troubleshoot something that they come into, issue with when they're trying to achieve a task. Technology. The difference in technologies that each group understands can bring about unique ways to utilize their skills and combine new and old technologies depending on the circumstances. And here are some quotes on the screen that I just kind of about the benefits of multi-generational leadership that I thought were appropriate. There is an employee out there who still thinks of you because you were kind to them. Never stop being that leader. That's a quote by Chris Donnelly. And great leaders are not the best at everything. They find people who are the best at different things and get the best out of them. And that's a quote by John Rowe. So it's something to keep in mind when you're leading a team or a group of people. So models of behavior for multi-generational leadership. Emotional intelligence. It's also known as emotional quotient, but you may see it just EI or EQ as the acronym. Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and defuse conflict. Some key things to keep in mind when it comes to emotional intelligence and gaining it. First off would be empathy and compassion, and that includes yourself. Great leaders get it. They're in tune with how their team feels, and that makes effective communication and trust possible. Second is self-awareness. When you're aware of your own emotions, you lead with calm and confidence. It's about handling yourself before handling others. Third, emotional regulation. Stress is contagious, but so is calm. Keep your cool when things get heated, and your team will follow your lead. This really goes into the science of like mirror neurons. If I raise my voice, you're more likely to raise your voice. If I speak calmly, you're more likely to speak calmly. So keep that in mind when you're leading your team. Social skills, it's not just about talking, it's about connecting. Build real relationships with your team. Make sure you're interested in them. Interested people are interesting. So you want to make sure that you're asking them about their lives, about what motivates them. And that goes into the next one, motivation, lifting others up. Positive energy from you means positive energy from your team. Lead with purpose, and they'll stay driven and engaged. Next would be conflict resolution. Handling conflicts with empathy solves problems and creates a culture where people feel safe and respected. And the final one is active listening. Make sure not only to listen, but to hear your team to show them they matter. And let's go on to the next one. Having a growth mindset. Just take a drink. Excuse me. So a growth mindset is the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed over time. People with a growth mindset see all experiences as learning opportunities and believe that skills and talents can be improved through hard work, the right strategies, and guidance from others. The first step in that would be to embrace challenges or demonstrate adaptability. So view challenges as an opportunity to learn. Don't view them as the end of things. View them as something that's part of the growth process. Learn from criticism would be the second one. Seek constructive feedback to improve and use it as a tool for growth. Ask your leaders, ask your peers for feedback, and take it to heart. Third would be celebrating effort, not just results, encouraging your team. Acknowledge your hard work and your team's hard work, and understand the effort that drives improvement. Fourth would be cultivating curiosity. Stay open to new ideas and constantly expand your knowledge. Fifth, be patient. Recognize that growth takes time and it requires consistent effort. I always think about Mr. Rogers and people like Bob Ross, happy little accidents, little mistakes. Be patient with your team because it's going to help them build that trust relationship, and it's going to let them know that being a human is okay. You're not expecting them to be a robot. Next would be setting incremental goals. So break down larger goals into achievable steps and celebrate the small victories. It's really important to do this to help create that growth culture that you really want to have in your company. Next, surround yourself with positive influences. Engage with growth-minded people and avoid unnecessary negativity. Obviously, there has to be critiques and things and feedback, and sometimes things are not going to be, rainbows and sunshine, but you should be making sure that you surround yourself with people who have a generally positive attitude about the things you're engaging in. View failure as feedback. So see failure as part of the learning process and adjust your approach. Next, challenge your limiting belief. Replace negative thoughts with empowering beliefs. It's really takes time and practice to do this. If you go to negative places quickly, you may have to take more time to practice the negative thought replacement. And then the last one would be practicing self-compassion. And this is important because being kind to yourself during setbacks and treating yourself with encouragement will help you do so with other people. Often we're hard on ourselves, so we end up being hard on others, is another way to put that. So next would be overcoming the fear of failure. this is extremely important. A fear of failure is the feeling of insecurity or anxiety about failing. It can manifest in various ways, often tied to situations where you feel judged, such as presentations, important conversations at work, or social occasions. And there's some key things here to remember. So first would be like our, this is biological, our neuro alarm system. Practice reframing failure as feedback and learning, not as failure in the sense that I can't do this, but, oh, I made a mistake and there's something that I need to learn from this moment. Next, practice small wins. Micro wins reinforce a growth mindset, as we discussed, but think about progress, not perfection. This helps rewire your brain and your teams for confidence. Third, brains can change. Reflect on failures to identify patterns and learnings. Fourth, social survival. All people fear rejection, but most people are too focused on their own challenges to remember your setbacks or the setbacks of your team. Keep that in mind and help encourage your team to understand that. They're not on display. A mistake is just part of the learning process. Your inner coach would be next. That's fifth. Use journaling or visualization to strengthen your prefrontal cortex's ability to manage fear. So there are things you can actively do to actually reduce the way your body reacts to fear of failure. Six would be fight, flight, or freeze. Practice mindfulness to stay calm and reduce cortisol levels. There's a great specialist in this field, Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's a scientist who specializes in mindfulness and has tons of information that you can learn about practicing this very useful technique. Way too in-depth to go into that here, but I would definitely implore you to check out mindfulness if you want to learn more about overcoming the fear of failure. So next we have learning versus panic. Your brain operates best when you're slightly outside your comfort zone, but not extremely outside your comfort zone. And keep that in mind with your team. Aim for challenges that stretch them, but don't overwhelm them. And make sure you're doing check-ins with them to make sure that you're acknowledging, hey, I know this is a lot. Is this too much for you? Do we need to maybe dial it back a little bit? Next would be emotional strength. Build resilience because it helps you recover from setbacks. Or your team, help them build resilience by doing this. And develop a habit of gratitude. This strengthens emotional regulation and keeps you grounded during challenges. Stop rumination is the next one. Interrupt rumination with action, such as physical activity. And keep in mind, when it comes to a neuroscience side of things, dwelling on mistakes activates what's called the default mode network and reinforces self-doubt, which undermines confidence. Next would be fear and imagination. Practice imagining successful outcomes to retrain your brain toward optimism. The human brain doesn't distinguish between real or imagined fear. It's a great way to think about, to do mind exercises in this way. Mirror neurons, I mentioned those earlier. Surround yourself with other people who embrace growth because they'll inspire and embolden you. When you see others succeed also, your mirror neurons fire, helping you believe in your own potential. And finally, compassion. Self-compassion reduces activity in your threat detection system and increases motivation for self-improvement. So teaching your team self-compassion is an important skill as a leader too, to not be as hard on themselves. If they call themselves stupid or they worry they're incapable of something, help guide them towards a better way of thinking about these things. And then also speak to yourself as you would a friend. So keep that in mind. When you're talking to yourself, encouragement fosters persistence. That speak to yourself that way, but also speak to your team that way. Next, we have some quotes again that I thought were, appropriate for what we're talking about. One is, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge, from Simon Sinek. Warren Buffett. So the Oracle of Omaha, right? Surround yourself with people that push you to do better. No drama or negativity, just higher goals and higher motivation. Good times and positive energy. No jealousy or hate. Simply bringing out the absolute best in each other. And the third one is, leadership isn't about you. It's about the impact you leave on others, Dr. Alex Young. So I think those are all very profound sentiments as to modeling behavior. So let's take a look at styles for leading multi-generational work groups. Be a teacher and be a student. So being a teacher and being a student, remember that the extra time you spend with an employee learning will pay off for them and yourself later. Be open to learning what the employee needs from you to best help them achieve their goals, such as are they a visual learner or hands-on, etc., while also teaching them how to achieve those goals. The investment of your time now will allow trust to build and diminish your workload in the long term, while also empowering your employees to be self-reliant and less dependent. They can also end up being teachers to other employees, and that in turn extends that beyond just you. So now you've turned them into teachers and students. Empathy. Show that you can understand the emotional view of the situation that an employee is in. Let them know you have their best interests at heart and that they can come to you with any concerns or issues they are dealing with. Be open-minded and do it from a non-judgmental place. Forgiveness of mistakes. Be understanding of mistakes. Ask questions. Don't be judgmental. Find out why the mistake was made and make a sincere effort to help them overcome the mistake. Sometimes an employee just needs a little extra time to learn a new skill or procedure, but this also builds on the relationship and the trust, channel your inner Mr. Rogers if you must. Effective communication skills. Ask employees about their interests, their families, and other things that are important to them. Be sincerely interested in who they are as a person and not just as a subordinate in the company. And trust. Allow your employees to confide in you their concerns and don't share that information with others. Respect the privacy of these conversations unless it's something illegal or against company policy. If they share something that must be reported, be honest about the actions you are required to take. Depending on the severity, you may have to discuss with your own leader, let the person go, or contact the authorities. Hopefully you're never in that situation, but it is part of trust and being honest. So Brad's model for multi-generational leadership. These are my recommendations for leading a multi-generational work group. Throughout my research, I found there are some consistencies between all generations of people. The differences between generations can be overcome by the behaviors I've listed previously. One, though, would be every worker wants to have their objectives clearly communicated to them. If that's difficult or not possible for every task, they want to know their leaders have the humility and self-realization to say so. Number two, all your employees want to be heard and feel like their personal experiences are of value. Number three, each person wants to share what they know or have learned with others, no matter what generation they're from. And then four, people of all ages also want to know that it's okay to make a mistake and they aren't expected to be perfect. So asking questions. It's always good to approach a situation with curiosity and not judgment. When we are curious, we are open to new information and different ways of thinking that we may not have considered. Whenever you see an employee doing something that doesn't make sense to you, take a moment to consider that they may have another way of approaching the situation. There is almost never one right way to do a task. A majority of the time, people simply have different experiences and training that lends itself to their own unique perspective. By taking the time to ask questions, you may learn about a new approach or a technique that may be utilized in future tasks. You will increase your effectiveness in communication and trust with your employee, and they will respect you for asking about their methodology. I like to think about the Columbo technique. If you Google it, it's a great technique. If you're old enough to remember the show Columbo, he asks a lot of questions, and it's actually a very powerful technique. Clear communication would be next. When communicating with people, especially our employees, there's an inclination to lean on your position of authority to have them do something without taking the time to explain it to them. When it comes to the reasons why or the full context of the task. This reduces our effectiveness in the long run as leaders because the employee may not understand the task or the reason why it needs to be done. This tends to leave a residue of possible anger, frustration, and misunderstanding. And over time, these negative feelings will build up and your relationship with your employee will deteriorate. By taking the time to explain to someone the reasons why a task needs to be done and how it affects the rest of the team, company, and the employee's work, you develop more trust with the employee. This helps them become more independent and able to adapt to the needs of the task if it changes. They are also better able to teach other employees, which increases your effectiveness as a leader by freeing up more of your time. You also build trust in the employee because you have made sure that you both have the same understanding of the goal and how to achieve it. You have shown them that you believe in their capability and that they can be relied upon without needing you to check on them constantly. Empathy. Being empathetic is not the same as being sympathetic, although the two get confused a lot. Forgive me if you already know this. When you are dealing with people from various age groups and backgrounds, it's good to be cognizant of what they are feeling. Depending on their age or physical condition, there may be limitations to their capabilities for a specific duty. Don't make assumptions, though. This goes back to building communication and trust. It's a good idea to know who your employees are beyond the job they are doing. They could have personal things going on, such as a medical issue, a family problem, or some other thing that may affect their job performance or ability to fulfill certain duties at any given time. By staying tuned into your employees' lives, you are better able to gauge what they are feeling. Forgiveness. Forgiveness to others and to ourselves as leaders is an important element. First, we must learn to forgive ourselves for our own shortcomings and mistakes. No one's going to get it perfect all of the time, and no one knows everything. And as we learn, we are bound to make mistakes along the way. Learning from our mistakes is a big step towards emotional intelligence and well-being. Once we are able to forgive ourselves for the mistakes we make along our own journey and accept they are part of the experience, we are better able to forgive others. Forgiving others for their mistakes shows them that it's okay to make mistakes. It allows them to realize their own potential without the hindrance of being reprimanded for being human. People want compassion and empathy when they make a mistake. They want to know it's going to be okay and that no one is perfect and they aren't expected to be perfect. Trust. Trusting our own decision as leaders and trusting our people are both equally important. As a leader, you must trust that when you make a decision, you are doing so in the best interest of your people. A good leader also trains their people to be autonomous in their duties. This shows that you're invested in their future, not just your own. As a leader, you build trust by taking responsibility for mistakes and errors, while also giving your team credit and building them up when they succeed and do well. A great way to think about leading others is to trust but verify, meaning you train your people to do their jobs, you don't micromanage them, you let them take chances, possibly make mistakes, and then check their progress and discuss any issues that arise with respect, empathy, and understanding. This builds their confidence, which makes them more effective at their jobs. The best thing you can do as a leader is to train your people to need you less and eventually be able to step into your shoes if and when you move up the ladder. It's good to understand each person's limitations as well. Be open with them about discussing what they are comfortable with. Take the time to see their point of view on things they may find trouble doing or don't know much about. It's important to help them go outside of their comfort zone slowly and point out the little successes along the way to encourage growth. Thank you for taking the time to attend this presentation. I know we covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate everyone taking their time, though, to be here today. And I hope you have learned how to be a better lead to your team of people of various generations and increase your retention rates in your respective companies. I have contact information on the screen if you feel like reaching out to me on LinkedIn or emailing me with any of your questions down the road beyond the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. That was a terrific amount of information, extremely valuable information. You titled your project Multi-Generational Leadership. I might simply have titled it Leadership. You have the slant on the generations, and I made a couple of notes. I see Ben has rejoined us. And I'm looking at the clock. We get 5 to 1. And I think, we typically would like to, particularly when we do these lunch hours, with understanding that people will be probably dropping off in the next 5 minutes or so. It occurred to me, and I wrote it down a couple of times, because there's so much information, and the audience should know that this will now be posted to the Jefferson website, and it will also be on the Jefferson Facebook page. And one of the interesting things about the presentation on the Jefferson Facebook page, it actually is closed captioned. And that will enable you to capture a lot of the information Brad was sharing that was not actually on the slides, the slides being in effect the outline. And there's a lot more detail that Brad shared. And so given the terrific amount of information, I just want to make sure the audience knows that if they really want to go back and look at something or hear it twice, you have that opportunity on the Jefferson Facebook page. But in any event, what I was thinking is I was trying to think, I started writing down, questions, and I ended up with several small pages of notes here, but I got about 6 or 7 starred questions. But I think my first question, Brad, is really the key. Multi-generational leadership, like being an effective leader, is really, I don't know if you'd like to comment on this, it's a sustained exercise in empathy.
I would agree with that. I think you to be an effective leader, you need to be empathetic. You need to be tuned to your team.
Yeah, most people, I mean, I work with young leaders, people who are new at it, but this is also true for experienced leaders. And experience might simply mean they've got time on task, but they're not particularly good at it. They're not particularly bad at it. They just kind of stayed there. We all have met those people. The ones who are flamingly not good at it tend to actually, although they do some damage, they tend to be gone rather quickly. But in any event, on a more positive note, the thing I think that catches young people, it's forget young, old, that catches new leaders, people who have been promoted to a leadership position. The thing that always, I think, throws them, or frequently, maybe not always, frequently throws them is that whatever skill set they had that got them that promotion turns out to be either A, irrelevant. Well, it's not irrelevant, but certainly turns out to be of secondary importance, because now the whole job is about people. Leadership's not about leading widgets. Some wise guy once made the comment, and I'll try to turn this into a positive. Some wise guy once made the comment, management would be easy if it weren't for people. If you could reduce it to a spreadsheet and move stuff around, well, I can't say anybody can do that, but almost anybody can do that and make it work. But that's not going to get you anywhere. Management and leadership more so than management, but both. It's all about people. All about people. And
I agree
you have
100%.
to ask yourself, there's a famous James C. Maxwell, I think, is it John C. Maxwell or James C. Maxwell?
John, it's John. I've read multiple of his books.
He's got a famous quote I'm using in a project I'm working on. If you turn around and look behind you and there's no one there, you're not leading anything. You're just out for a walk.
Yep.
And it's all about followers. And you get followers will only follow people they want to follow. And the people they want to follow are people who, likable is not quite the right word, but I think it's people who they feel have some ability to identify with me and understand me, and who I can trust. So the two big words I would take away are empathy, understanding people, and trust. If they can't trust you, I don't want to get, well, there's a fairly spectacular example in contemporary American culture of a leader who violates most of this. I don't understand what, but we won't go there. It's all about that. I mean, I'm talking because there's just so much information, Brett. I actually had down at one point in time to ask you, what are the key items for each generation? I think that's too long now. Just tell the audience, you can see that on the web if you go look at it. But there's some really interesting insights Brad has. Ben?
So Dr. Roth, I appreciate that, and I would love for us to get into that. I do want to sneak in, if it's okay, a couple of audience questions, because we have some coming in via Q&A in the Zoom webinar. And folks, a reminder that we do have the comment section of the Facebook Live post open, in which right now, Brad, you just have praise. Great job, Brad. But the questions we're getting in from the webinar side, The first one is wondering about the differences between generations and approaching that interpersonal conflict and how they do it, navigate that differently. And we were just talking about empathy and how we connect people to people. So this person acknowledged different generations approach interpersonal conflict differently. How do you best work through that? So if you have conflict, you have different generations approaching it, interpersonal conflict. What advice do you give? What did you find in your research, Brad, of how you manage multiple generations approaching interpersonal conflict?
You have to take it from like a more mediator approach. You have to discuss it with each party individually, usually, and that find out what the conflict is about, and then bring them into your office or into a safe place that you can discuss together, depending upon your environment you're in. Like if you're in retail, you may not have an office. You can go close the door and like have this discussion. You may have to find a place where you're separate from the rest of the group, but you have to find out what the issue is between both of them, what the perspectives are. And this is about being empathetic, though, is really tuning into what they're feeling, because there is usually some feelings behind it. And there may even be some baggage that they're carrying from previous experiences. And then you have to go and discuss this with both people in the room and try to mediate that conflict the best you can. There is no one size fits all solution other than being empathetic, being attentive, and making sure that they trust you, then that you're trying your best to give them a result that they both will basically win from, if you want to put it in like a win-lose context. I know compromise sometimes is a dirty word to some people. I don't think it is. It's something that we all have to do, especially in our work environments. Sometimes you'll get strong personalities. Sometimes you'll get people who are more subdued. And you have to work around that and find ways to help each other work together. So that conflict resolution, that's where mediation can really come into play. And different generations, as we discussed, have different ways of viewing the world. And you have to kind of take that into context. I would further that a little bit too, to understand, did they come from a rural background, an urban background, a suburban background? Are they from a more affluent family? Are they from a more poverty-stricken family? Things like that all play a part in how we perceive our world. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, and Brad, what is clear to me in that answer, I think is one, again, knowing your team, knowing about them before you arrive, that's certainly beneficial, knowing your team before you arrive to a conflict. But I think also the important attribute, as much as there might be generational differences, one common thread amongst all generations that I think makes for successful leaders is the ability to listen, to actually hear your colleagues, your employees, and hear what it is they're saying, and then process. Trust that it's I heard what it is you're saying, and now let's work towards some solution. Maybe cleaning up, the dirty word of compromise or consensus, and actually bringing it back to this is something that works for all of us, in which we each give up something, or we're finding mutual ground we can agree upon. I'll sneak in another audience question, Dr. Roth. I can turn it back over to you after that. We talked about some of the milestones of how generations are forged, their perspectives, some of the stereotypes associated with them, often world events that are big, and heavy and weighty, and no doubt this person's acknowledging that we live in divisive times now. They're wondering, how do you suggest navigating workplaces where multi-generationality impacts the social culture, especially with generational differences and social issues during these divisive times? So, thinking about navigating workplaces where multi-generationality, I love that we're learning all these new terms during this, Brad. Navigating that socially in workplaces, especially when the world can seem a little hot right now. What advice do you have? What did you find in your research?
Let's go back then to the question and just make sure I understand it. Then what you're asking is, when there's such a diverse amount of generations who've gone through so many different types of events in their lives, how do you help make it a cohesive culture? Is that what we're talking
Well,
about?
I think looking at the moment now of how different worldviews, experiences lead up to the social culture of today, especially with those generational differences. So when we encounter social issues at work with our team, how do you navigate that? When times appear to be hotter.
So through the research and through my own experience, I would say that you always have to be careful when you're navigating these waters, because the goal isn't to make anyone feel like they don't belong or offend anybody's sensibilities, because everybody's got their own point of view on the world and the circumstances, surrounding our current situation. But a good strategy is to look for the commonalities between each other and not focus on those things that divide us. There are going to be things that we all differ on. We're all going to have different opinions on things. But there are some things that are unavoidable, obviously, depending upon your industry, how something might affect your day-to-day work, how stuff, there's just a plethora of things we could go into. But I think the basic concept is that you really take the time to look for what makes you, what do you have in common? What kind of difficulties are you facing and how can you overcome them together? Keep in mind that we're all going to face difficulties in life. We're all going to face things that we don't expect to happen, but also keep in mind that we're all pretty much aiming for the same goal. We're all aiming to have a safe, secure life with a financial future. Most of us aren't looking to be billionaires. We're just looking to be able to support our families, to have food on the table, to know that we have a job the next day, to have gas in the car, and keep those things in mind, I guess, is what I would say. And if there's something else that doesn't answer that question, I can always get back to you on that.
Well, and it was so great that you shared your contact information. We'll ask you to do it again, and of course, it lives in perpetuity here in the video. But Brad, I think that's a great recommendation. I was that reminded me of a conversation I was having with somebody who is in the leadership space in community foundations, and he was telling me about a conversation he was having where somebody was saying, "How do we stop talking about all that divides us?" And his reply was, why don't we talk about what unites us and just change the conversation and focus on that shared ground? And I think when we do, and I heard you say that earlier in the presentation, allow yourself to be optimistic, focus on the positives rather than, the potential threats, of course, which we should be aware of. But I think when you think positively and find that, and Dr. Roth, I'm thinking about the American Tapestry Project of what binds us together more than what divides us, and finding those common threads in the American story. So, Dr. Roth, I'm going to pitch back to you while I check the comment sections again and questions. And again, I want to thank everybody for holding on. Saying a little bit later, this has been such a great conversation. But Dr. Roth, I'm going to pitch back to you.
I'm looking at the clock too, and if there are any other questions from the webinar, can we deal with them? Can you see that now, Ben? And I would just actually draw people's attention to it. Unfortunately, I didn't write down the number, but I think it was the last slide. But I also do think if you're going to want to review this, the best thing to do would be go to the Jefferson's Facebook page and watch the video there, because as I said, it's closed captioned and you'll get Brad's narration. Well, you'd get his narration anyways verbally, but you'd also be able to read it. But Brad's summation on, his model, Brad's model for being a multi-generational leader actually is a terrific model for being a leader.
Thank you.
Brad said people are looking for consistency. One of the things a leader needs to be is consistent, because people can't. I'm not going to go there. People need consistency. When they come into the office, the workplace, the work group, the factory, the restaurant, whatever it might be, the coffee shop, when they walk in tomorrow morning, they want to have a reasonable expectation that what they're supposed to do and how the day is going to unfold is going to look like it did yesterday. And so they don't want to walk in and you've changed the rules, or the way to get promoted, et cetera, et cetera. They need consistency. That doesn't mean it needs to be frozen in time forever. They just need some consistency. Every worker wants clear direction. I think Brad and you and I talked about it when we were doing this, and he doesn't need a plug from me, but there's a book, I believe it's still in publication, by a guy named Ferdinand Fornés, who I don't believe Ferdinand is still with us, but this book was written 30 or 40 years ago. And he was a management consultant who boiled down why employees don't do what they're supposed to do and what to do about it. And he boiled it down to 14 reasons. And the very first one, and they start very simple. They didn't know they were supposed to do it. Nobody ever told them. Number two, They don't know how to do it. Nobody ever trained them. And then, of course, it does by the time you get to number 14, they're much more sophisticated, and they get into the things Brad is talking about with empathy. They're more sociocultural and interpersonal things and that kind of subtlety. But those first two things, be consistent, because the people are looking for consistency. Make sure everyone clearly understands what we're doing, but give them the slack or the room to do it themselves, because
Yeah.
that was your next one. People want to be heard.
Yeah.
I always would tell staff members, we would meet and we'd say, we're going to do X, whatever X was, and here's a way to do it. And I'd always end the conversation with saying, but while you're doing it, if you can think of a better way of doing it, God love you, do it your way. All I care about is that on day Y, when we said it'd be done, it's done. You know,
Right.
so, they want to be heard because they're smart people. You wouldn't have
Yeah.
them around you if they weren't smart people who know what they're doing. So listen to them. Eliminate fear of mistakes. I think that's one of the most important things you brought up.
Yeah.
People, and you've got to be willing to, I think I'm jumping down to the order you gave it. That gets to forgiveness. And forgiveness isn't so much the issue, but eliminate fear of mistakes. But that, if you want people to be empowered and you want them to take the initiative, you can't smack them on the back of the head when they stumble. What you have to do is to help them understand what happened and, okay, what can we learn from this, et cetera, and you go forward. So that's great. I love your Columbo technique. I'm familiar with that. Ask questions. One of the things leaders, not young, forget that. That's a generational comment. Inexperienced leaders, regardless of age, one of the things they learn quickly is that the mark of intelligence isn't what you know, it's the quality of the questions you ask.
Yeah.
And
It's good.
ask people because they'll know. I mean, don't assume, never assume. This is back to your next one is empathy. We began with that. We probably could end with empathy and trust. Understand who you're with. It's all about that.
Yeah.
Understand who you're with. And of course, we'll close with trust. Brad, this was excellent. I know we're near the end time here. Great job. Ben?
So I know that time was a precious commodity of one of the generations. I think it was Gen X that you mentioned, Brad. But I'm going to take the liberties, and folks, if you do have to leave us, we understand. And if you're visiting this program later, thanks for watching. Maybe in chunks. I'm going to sneak in one more audience question here before we conclude. And this person is asking then, and I think this builds on the discussion that we've been having, some of the past questions. Then how do you bridge the increasingly diverse workforce of younger generations with older generations in the workforce who may not always be tactful or politically correct or correct in how they engage with that diversity? They're citing multiculturalism, multiracialism, trans non-binary employees, etc. Different generations approach these differently. And Brad, you talked about the openness of generations over time. Different generations approach these differently. How can we bridge that so that we can advocate for our diverse employees without othering others?
That's a great question, but that's a tough question also. So I may not be able to give you a complete answer on that, but I would say that this is definitely where coaching is one of the most important steps of being a leader. And again, that goes back to empathy and I was just going to make a comment about Andy bringing up the communication. It's not just communicating, it's making sure that you are a clear communicator and that it's effective communication. Because we can communicate all day long, but if I'm the message giver and you're the message receiver, if you don't understand what I'm saying to you and the context in which I'm giving it, it's a lot harder to execute your duties, right? So coaching, I would say, would be one of your best things that you could do as a leader. And you may have to do some extra research on your own time to coach those people of generation. So if you're trying to coach somebody about non-binary situations, something that I've had to learn as I go along in life too is, how do I talk about this in a respectful way with my employees? So I ask questions to people who are non-binary. I look it up online and I try to find ways to support the information that I'm getting and find out what the current, I guess, standard is, so that's just a simple example, I guess, but coaching is the key to this. And you may have to do one-on-one coaching with your people to help them understand how to approach. So say you have somebody who's in their 60s or 70s, and you have somebody in their 20s, and the 60-year-old is, doesn't understand the non-binary stuff, whereas the 20-year-old is non-binary. You may have to go in and have a discussion with that older employee and just let them know that, hey, there are certain things that we need to do to make sure everybody feels included here. You're allowed to have your own personal points of view, but while we're in the workplace, we have to be respectful of one another. So that's where the coaching, I think, comes in. And I hope that answers the question.
Well, and Brad, I think a couple of things that stood out in your answer to me there is one, you touched on it in your presentation. I think the idea of leaders being lifelong learners, being open and knowing what you don't know and asking more. I think also the T word, trust, having trust in your team and saying, this is something I don't necessarily understand. Can you help me? Or somebody saying, I'm seeing that you might be struggling with this. Can I help you see that and understand that? And I think having that kind of communication that can be open, and I think that goes back to that consistency that if you've created a climate of tolerance, acceptance, openness, and inclusion, no matter how things change over time, that's going to be a safe space for people to be working in. And that's how I think you can help guide those conversations. I'll conclude with the final comment from the Zoom webinar. It's not a question, it's just a comment. No questions, just wanted to say this was a great presentation. Thank you. So, Brad, I'm going to ask you one more time before we end here. Share your contact information with us. You can just give it verbally here on the call. Andy, I'll ask you for any parting words, and then I will get us out of here.
So you can contact me via email. It's my name, Bradley S. Thompson @outlook.com, or I'm on LinkedIn. So if you were to do the LinkedIn.com /in/Bradley S. Thompson, you would find me on there. I'm currently the programmer for television and radio for WQLN, PBS, NPR. And I plan to be there for a long time. So if if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And my phone number too, my personal cell is 814-860-4079. If I don't answer right away, maybe shoot me a text to let me know that you're not a telemarketer.
Brad, that is incredibly generous of you. Thank you for recapping that. Andy, any final words before I give us our outro and next steps here for this event?
Just one comment. When Brad talked about asking questions, the corollary to that, if you want to be an effective and empathetic leader, is to listen to the answers.
Yep.
To that, I say amen. And to Dr. Andrew Roth, I say thank you. Dr. Roth, scholar in residence at the JES and director of the Raimy Fellowship Program, thank you for your guidance in today's conversation, all of your work with all of our fellows leading up to their presentations, their outputs, and their contributions to the community. Brad Thompson, thank you a million here for this great conversation, echoing what we heard in the webinar there, and continuing an open conversation around this. We're looking forward to future presentations, discussions around multi-generational leadership working, what it means to be able to be with others, understand others, and learn from that. Really appreciate your research, your insights, your knowledge, your expertise, and your recommendations. And of course, thanks to all of you watching, whether you tuned in via webinar or were watching us live stream on Facebook, or happen to be watching this or listening to this at a later date. We appreciate you engaging with JES programming. Of course, for more information about JES programming, you can head to our website, jeserie.org. You're also going to find videos of past presentations available to stream on demand, publications including reports, essays, timely writings, and of course, book notes by Dr. Andrew Roth, as well as output by the JES's Civic Leadership Academy and the Raimy Fellows. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, connect with us on LinkedIn, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Spagan. Thanks for listening and learning with us.